I can't imagine growing up in a small town where your mother ultimately was mayor, your father, well-known doctor. That had to put pressure on you as their offspring, firstborn son. What was it like growing up with two such successful parents?
Well, my mother was focused on education, and my dad was focused on practicing medicine. Mm-hmm. And he practiced for 40 years, and I don't think he ever sent out a statement. Mm-hmm. And I asked him one time after I was working with Blue Cross and Blue Shield, I said, "Pop, how come you don't send out a bill?" He said, "Let me tell you something, son. I've made more money than I ever thought I would. And people are sick whether they have money or not. Mm-hmm. And I am a doctor." So that's how he looked at it, so on and so forth. Growing up, I told you about Cy Roberts, talking about, are you Jack and Janelle's oldest boy, or are you Doc and Liz's boy? I told you that, about the two roosters in the barnyard. Mm-hmm. But what's it like? My daughter, I think, defined it the best. If you're talking about my family, she said, and she's a real funny woman, so I get a kick out of her. She said, at our family gatherings, everybody puts on their boxing gloves and goes to a neutral corner. Yeah. Just like this. Because my mom and dad were terribly competitive. Mm-hmm. And they would do the Reader's Digest had that how to build your word power every month in the Reader's Digest. Mm-hmm. And so they get it and they do it. Of course, my mom would just throttle at my dad. Mm-hmm. And my dad would say, "How smart are you anyway?" And she said, "Smarter than you." and so funny, and it was competitive. And so I was brought up in, say, a competitive environment.
Right. You remember what got your mother interested in becoming the mayor?
Well, I think that, after her stint at the school board, I think that my dad said, "That's enough. We need to raise these kids," and so on and so forth. But I think she always had a desire to achieve, driven to achieve. She's a Phi Beta Kappa. Mm-hmm. She's really had a photographic mind. She's really bright. And we laughed about it because she ran, when she got on the planning commission, and then she wanted to run for city hall, for a city councilor. Mm-hmm. Okay, and so she runs for city council, but the guy that was in that district, he had the backing from Frank Papajohn, mm-hmm. who had the coal company,
right.
and a bunch of money.
Right.
Well, then she gets beat. Oh my God. I thought I was going to have to leave the house. She was walking around, "I don't see how he beat me. I don't see what went wrong." Well, what happened is that guy moved out of the district. Well, then Harry Powers was the mayor, mm-hmm. and he appointed my mother to that.
Okay.
And so what he did was he let the fox in the hen house. Mm-hmm. And so she decided she was going to run for mayor. And so my dad was, he said, "All right, Liz is going to run for mayor. Now, I want to finance your campaign." Well, in this time, my grandmother Kilgore had moved down here because she broke her hip up there. My mother moved her down here and she used to stay in the Mason Hotel, and then she ensconced her in the Will Rogers. Mm-hmm. And so, and she died, and my grandmother Kilgore gave my mother, she got my grandmother's estate. Mm-hmm. And it was fairly significant. Mm-hmm. And so when my dad said, "I want to finance your campaign," and she said, I don't need you to finance my campaign." And then my dad said, "How much money did that old woman give you anyway?" And she said, "That's my money. I'll spend it how I want to." And he said, "Okay." Well, so it was like that. Mm-hmm. In our house.
Right.
Constant competition for who could do this. And that's the reason my brother got a bachelor's, a master's, and a doctorate. And I was just glad to get anything.